Hello, I'm Michael Mayer from VocalWisdom.com, and in this video I'm going to talk about kind of a bunch of different concepts that really mean the same thing. I've got a list of different topics that I want to talk about in different videos, and so I've written down sul fiato, on the breath, the difference between exhaling and compressing, appoggio, and the concept of a ball on the fountain, and these things are all different descriptions or concepts that relate to really breathing, and we most commonly hear the term support. But the thing is that the way that the majority tend to perform that concept is really a mistake. And so I wanted to address that and kind of explain what, at least my viewpoint of what these things mean, and a more effective, from my experience, a more effective way of doing it. We hear these concepts thrown around, these words, these terms, being on the breath, and support, and we even hear the Italian term appoggio, and they all kind of come down to the appropriate performance of these things, and the mistaken application or comes down to this other note I had: the difference between exhaling and compression. This difference is really actually critical for the balance of the voice. So that's what we're going to go into in this video, and try to explain and demonstrate the difference between what was traditionally meant by these ideas and what we tend to observe people doing now. Breath compression is sort of a somewhat elusive concept, because it really depends on the condition of the mechanism. If the vocal mechanism is letting the breath escape, then it's really not possible to create compression without extra effort. And that's why when we support, it tends to be an active thing that we're doing, and in a certain sense we start to force the voice in a lot of cases, especially when people are singing more intense, more dramatic sorts of music. This supporting turns into pushing. And it's funny because, well, I mean, it's not funny, but it's sort of funny in a sense, because we're always told not to push, but then we're told to support, and we're not taught how to create a balanced condition where that is actually productive, because that support turns into pushing. And so this is really a fundamental piece of the puzzle for us. And if you are familiar with what I teach, you'll understand how this all relates. But see, if you're not familiar with my teaching, you might not realize this really has to do with the vocal mechanism, the larynx, the condition. How is that functioning? Because everything we do with the breath has an effect on the voice, and the condition of the voice has an effect on the condition of the breath. They are the voice and the breath are a partnership, and the condition of each influences the other, and so that's the key. And so when we are taught to ignore the larynx, think as far away from the larynx as you can, and do everything with your breath, then we are going to have a lot of trouble. So that's the thing, that all of these concepts, they they filter back to this relationship between the voice and the breath. And our job is to get those two things balanced, because in reality, both of them produce or supply force. Now, force is a word that kind of brings up connotations of that are somewhat counterproductive, because force, we think of force, but even that's a force, right? That's the lightest, tiniest little touch between my fingertips. But when we hear the word force, we think this, right? So it's important to recognize force is just force. It's not a lot of force, right? And that's what happens when we talk about just one side of this partnership, that the forces become out of balance. So if the voice is not providing a force of resistance, then the breath is going to be out of balance with the voice. That's what I'm talking about as far as these two parts partnering up, the voice and the breath. So let's start with this concept of on the breath, which is also very closely related to the concept of appoggio. Now, appoggio in Italian generally translates to lean or to set upon, something of that nature. And when we talk about support, we usually think of it as being, right? Support kind of brings up concepts like, the chairs on the legs on a chair, or the legs on a table. They're providing support to the chair, or the chair itself is supporting me. I'm sitting on the chair, so it's sort of this way. And appoggio kind of gives us a connotation of this way. And that sometimes can be confusing if we don't recognize the relationship of the vocal mechanism is on top of the breath. And that's the meaning of being on the breath. The mechanism, the voice, is on top of the breath. If we're actively exhaling, the voice is going to open in order to let that breath out. And so some of us may recognize this on the breath concept relating to the sound. We sort of float the sound on top of the breath that we're exhaling out. This is plain and simple a mistake. That's a mistaken concept of that, a mistaken application or interpretation of that concept. Another old visual aid that fits into this category is the ball floating on a fountain of water. Now, the ball is something physical. So again, our modern interpretation would tend to interpret the ball as the sound and the fountain as the breath. So then again, we've got the voice, meaning the sound, on the breath. But see, sound is so important to understand the basic reality of what we're dealing with. Breath is air and sound is air, but the sound can't be produced by the breath alone. It has to interact with the vocal mechanism. Even if I don't do it in a well-balanced way. The vocal mechanism, the soft tissue of the vocal folds is vibrating from the breath flow. Now you can hear how inefficient that is. It's totally out of balance. But still, the soft tissue is vibrating to make that sound. So if we just think sound, and we ignore the mechanism, we're going to get some degree of poor efficiency. And so what we want is to just simply be, let's acknowledge the reality. The mechanism of the voice, the larynx, which we can feel, and still actually I can't feel that, but I can tell where that action is happening. This gives a sense of where the mechanism is and where the resistance to the breath needs to happen. And not doing anything deliberately with the breath. Now I'm forcing the breath past the voice. Okay, so the voice on the breath really is meant to describe the vocal mechanism floating on the breath. The breath, and it really, not, a simple way to remember this is just reverse the statement. So take the voice on the breath and reverse it and say it, the breath under the voice. Then we can realize more clearly what that statement means. It means the breath and the voice are in this relationship. The voice is on top of the breath is underneath the voice. Not going through the voice, and the breath is not on top of the voice. It's, see, when we interpret the voice as being the sound on the breath, then the breath is going past the voice. And you can hear, I have to force the voice to get it to make the same degree of sound energy that it, and it still is not the same degree, but it's approaching the same degree as just effortlessly keeping the voice balanced in a balanced relationship to the breath, which is on top of, and the breath is underneath it. So again, recognizing the difference between exhaling and being in a state of compression. And now I say it that way because when the voice is on top of the breath and the breath is under the voice, we put our respiratory system into a state of compression, which is not an activity. Exhaling, we have to actively exhale in order to make sound. Because it's out of balance. When we create balance, there is a feeling of not doing anything because we've created a balanced condition. It feels like we're just standing still with our breathing. And the voice just vibrates. We don't feel the movement of sound. We feel movement of breath. So if you feel a sense of movement, then that means your breath is moving. You should have a feeling of stillness, a feeling of staying stationary, of not moving. That's why I'm always preaching that we need to stop our inhalation before we start the voice, because if we try to start the voice and we haven't created that stillness, we're going to move the breath out also. And then to move the breath out, it has to go through the voice. And when it goes through the voice, it dilutes the vocalization. It opens the vibration so that it doesn't vibrate pure. The vibration should stay touching. I don't like to say closed because it doesn't stay solidly closed, because vibration is rapid opening and closing. But it comes back to touching on each of those. On each of those vibrations, it comes back to contact. And the rapid opening and closing releases puffs of air of the breath that we've kept inside of us. And so see, the lips are touching. And puffs of air are coming out, and those puffs of air become the sound of the voice, and they echo in the vocal tract because of the nature of acoustics. Okay, so we don't really have to sing the sound of the voice. We just need to sing or play the production, just like any other instrument. We play the vibration of the voice. Ah. We don't have to tense anything. We don't have to hold anything except for the breath. But we don't have to hold the voice. We don't want to hold the voice because that would interfere with the free vibrating of it. But we don't want to push the breath out because then we'll make the breath come out faster than the vibration would release it. So it's really a process of learning how to feel and think a little bit from the other direction. We usually kind of automatically assume and think from the breath to the voice to the sound and out. When we start to really create balance, it kind of becomes the other way around, and the voice to the breath. You can even think, when it gets really well developed, you even think from the sound first, even though before it exists, right? So you're already feeling like you're producing sound because you opened your resonating system to be like it's already vocalizing, and then the voice, and then the breath, because the voice creates resistance and the breath automatically balances it. So it's the other way around. Rather than breath to voice to sound, sound to voice to breath. Yes. So, and again, it's a condition so that it feels like, kind of like what I've described in other videos about like a balloon. You inflate the balloon and then release the air pressure. So it's like our body is just a big balloon. There's air pressure. It's just, there is air pressure there. You can't help it. And all we're doing is coordinating the release of it so that it releases. And that's why I have people groan, is so that they can experience that. A groan is really, now it has to be free. It can't get tight. It has to be open so that it releases that air pressure in a nice, smooth way and not clamping down tight. That's a different topic. But so that's why it's important to be open above so that there's somewhere for that pressure to release into. If it's closed, it's going to be tight, and the vocal folds will not have the freedom to then vibrate in the appropriate way. So appoggio means this, not this. Ball in a fountain, the larynx on top of the breath. Remember it by the breath is under the voice. Don't push the breath through the voice. And instead of exhaling, which people sometimes think that's support, think of support as like the chair. The chair doesn't move to support your weight. It just is. And so the breath supports the voice by staying underneath it. The chair stays underneath it. The chair doesn't move us up. So the breath should not move the voice or move the sound. It should be under here. So it stays under the vibration. Don't move it. Don't move it deliberately. Don't exhale. And that creates compression. The air is is in a condition of compression. We don't have to compress. We don't have to compress. Just the intrinsic resistance the intrinsic what's the word I want? The intrinsic elastic resistance of the folds of tissue inside the larynx, when they naturally close when we stop breathing. So if we inhale and then just calmly stop, the glottis closes, the air underneath them is now in a state of compression, even though we don't really feel compression. That's what happens when we try. We don't need to try. We just need to create that condition, and we feel a little bit of pressure, inside here. And then when we start, that air pressure that's inside us automatically feeds the vocalization, feeds the vibration of the voice. We don't have to do it. That's the biggest thing. We have so many people trying to do it, and that immediately throws the whole system out of balance. So start experimenting and figuring out how to let the body just do what it can do automatically. Create the conditions and then just let it go. And again, you don't want to you don't want to let go in the sense of letting the balloon completely deflate, because then it's going to pop that balance. So you want to keep the breath. And that's why I talk about an imaginary balloon, because we can feel inside that feeling of being inflated, and we want to stay inflated. Now, of course, the vocalization will release that air pressure gradually, but we try to stay inflated, and that slows it down so that it doesn't get thrown out of balance. But it will deflate. It just does it at the whatever the rate of your vocalization is. So that is the key to balance. That's the key to not running out of air before the end of a phrase. All these things. That's the key to having natural tuning all the way through the range when you go. It's absolutely a requirement, a prerequisite for registration, and not having the voice be too heavy when you get to the higher range. So everything. That's why traditionally everybody always talked about the breath being the most important thing. It's not because we're using the breath to make the voice happen. It's because coordinating. They actually called it breath control. It's not the breath itself. It's the controlling of the breath, the coordinating of the breath to not throw the voice out of balance, so the voice can vocalize through the range and stay efficient and stay pure. So that's what those things mean. Appoggio, breath on, voice on the breath. Sul fiato, the ball on the fountain. Okay, they all relate to: are you exhaling or are you keeping the inhale? That's the suspension, keeping the condition of the inhale, suspending it so that the voice can vocalize without getting disrupted by the exhaling breath. Okay, so I hope that makes some sense. Give me your comments in the comments section wherever you're watching this, whether it's on the blog or it's on YouTube. And if you haven't if you haven't signed up to get my cheat sheet, the 7 steps to balanced vocal coordination, then go to my homepage at VocalWisdom.com and click the button that says "Get your cheat sheet." Fill in your email, and you'll be able to download that as soon as you confirm your email address. Okay, we'll talk again soon. Thanks.